you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join doctors Joanne and Erin as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
This is Women's History Month, and we honor the women who came before us and paved the way for us to fully step into our authority, leadership, and momentum that's now possible for us as women physicians. Let's talk about what's happening right now for women physicians. We're often celebrated for being resilient, for being flexible, for handling a lot and making it work. And our question is, at what cost? That praise often comes because women physicians are absorbing more. I would love to hear your perspective on this, Joanne. And how have we been showing up to this point?
Thank you, Erin. And I will start by saying that it's important to hear this information from a place and love of and compassion and no judgment, because we have been socially conditioned to kind of, I'll use the phrase, play small. And it's also part of our doctor programming, right? Like if we think of even when we were little girls, how, right, like you were supposed to be a good girl and not make too much fuss and, just say yes to all the things, be helpful, serve. And it's a beautiful thing. And we come from our hearts. But we're also kind of put down if we're demanding, if we're setting boundaries, if we're being too visible, right? Like too powerful, like those are not like women's traits. So playing small or like having this role, and I don't mean it in a negative way, it's just, the way we show up. And there's so many studies that talk about this. This is not necessarily our opinion of how many women are there in leadership and right, like how long does it take to go up the ladder. There was a recent publication about the disparity in pay. So those are things that are still happening, and it's not necessarily your fault. It's a lot of it. It's because of how we've been programmed and how we advocate for ourselves, because it's not a character flaw. It's kind of how we were brought up, right? Like I've shared in here how I describe myself as I'm the good girl, right? And they would compare me to my brother who's 5 years older and he did all the things. So it was like added pressure of you better behave, like you better be a good girl. But then also the dual kind of messages. And you have to, like I remember hearing, don't depend on a man, be independent, study, but you better be a good wife and your husband comes first and your kids come first. And it's all these mixed messages in this era of, right, like we're trying to step up and be independent and being empowered while we're also trying to be loving and serving. And it is confusing. And I think the default, based on how we're programmed and how we grew up, is to be the one to kind of step back and kind of let someone else like not create a lot of commotion. And then the other thing also is that when we do step up, because right, like that's part of what we're doing here in a right, like, in what we talk so much about, the redefining the rules too, sometimes we get a backlash or we feel guilty, right? So it comes with a lot of emotions that we also have to face. And right, like if we're not super aware of it, our brain is going to say like that's too much, let's hold back, right? And it's the constant redefining of how we want to show up, what's important to us, right? Like having the discernment of what's important. So we're kind of redefining, right? Like I keep on using the same word, how we want to show up and what's important. And it doesn't need to be going from one extreme to the other. And like you mentioned, we've had, right, like in celebrating women, so many amazing women. And then we think of what were their character traits, what let some of them stand out. And a lot of them did it with a lot of like, like it's groundedness. It wasn't necessarily like a fight. They just showed up with a lot of presence and a lot of love, and they spoke up and were standing in their shoulders. I love that phrase. And it's almost now our responsibility of how we want to show up. And it's not necessarily women trying to be men, right? Like, I think that we've confused those terms. It's more of how we use this beautiful feminine energy as well to show up with our strengths and serve without feeling bad, without feeling like we're too much. We also hear that phrase as well, or doing so much that then we get burned out or exhausted. So that there's so much that we can say here. I can go on and on, but that's kind of what comes to mind in hearing this question of kind of honoring who we've been so far, because a lot of it is societal and cultural in our field, and then also kind of questioning the norm and asking, is there a better way? It's not like it's bad before. It's like, how do we want to show up? What do we want? And I think we also talk so much about role modeling, right? Like, I think of that as well, of how do I want this new generation of doctors to show up and honor each other?
And I'm going to add a few things. I think that was so helpful to hear how we're showing up. A few other ways we're showing up differently. I think part of it is we do medicine differently than men. And so we spend about 1.5 times longer in our electronic health record. We spend longer in our patient rooms. And I think we do kind of shelf much of our femininity. And many of us who work in fields that have commonly been male dominated in medicine, and we turn on a lot of masculinity because that's maybe the expectation. And yet, as you look at medicine, over half of the individuals going into medical school now are women. And I really don't think that the culture of medicine has adapted for those numbers. And that makes it hard for women to do medicine in their manner and be fully have the same success as men, because we don't do it the same. We have different rules that maybe we create internally, so that makes us show up differently. And yet it feels like being, I don't want to judged, or we're having to play by the main rules that have been set for male physicians, if that makes sense.
Yes, so true. And I wanted to ask you, Erin, you mentioned in the introduction, at what cost? And I that's such a powerful question, because it's a we always have to think of what's the other side of the coin, and what are your beliefs of what's been the cost of us showing up in this way up to this point, because we're learning.
Well, one of the big issues that we're showing is higher burnout rates. So the burnout rates for women physician have been significantly higher than males, and really running around 50% plus or minus over the last several years for women in medicine. And again, how sustainable is that? And if you're not burnt out now, those burnout rates for women physicians, I look at it as either you're currently burned out or you were just burnt out, half of the time. And it's really not a sustainable place to be. We also have different odds. One number that I found interesting is that for women physicians who work more than 40 hours a week, which if you're even working part-time, I think you're putting in more than 40 hours a week, your divorce rates raised. For men physician working more than 40 hours a week, their divorce rates decreased. And speaking of divorce, women physicians tend to have about 1.5 times the divorce rates of their male physician colleagues, age adjusted. And you just think of all the negative impacts of all those. We do get better outcomes for our patients, which is great. And yet, again, there's that question, at what cost? And so that's talking about the specifics in our workplace. And now let's shift home. And we look at that second shift that we commonly bring up on this podcast. You get done with your first shift working as a physician. Now you come home and you're still doing more work compared to your male partner when it comes to the household, childcare duties, and even for those in the sandwich generation, taking care of your own parents or maybe even your in-laws. Again, tends to fall very heavily woman in the partnership. And those are things that if we don't start making changes, that cost is burdensome. And the most impactful cost can be the higher rates of mental health issues, and also the higher rates of physician suicide in women physicians compared to women in other professions.
Yeah, definitely cannot take any of this lightly, because it's way beyond just the disparity in titles or salary. It's our overall well-being and even our lives, right? So, and I can raise my hand in so many of those statistics that you've mentioned, right? And so part of why I'm so passionate about this work. And I also think of how we've defined success. A lot of it has been kind of old definitions that are, and again, I hate to make it like men and women, but we're just making distinctions here of in terms of like salary or titles or accolades, right? Or approval, and how we are learning to redefine it in terms of what's important to us. And part of why Erin and I do this podcast and thinking more about well-being and fulfillment and right and in the seasons of our lives, like both Erin and I are kind of on the over 50 and praising more time with our children who are older, and then also doing things in community and how we can our personal growth and not just seeing patients and making more money, even though that's important, right? Like there was a time when I worked really hard in having people in leadership know me, having my leadership titles, all part of all the committees, and kind of slowly stepped away from that. And it was beautiful what while it was happening. It's not a bad thing, but it's I always right like I think that we both talk in our work as coaches of helping women say it's okay for you to pause. It's okay to go part-time. It's okay to do other things. And are really helping you be more balanced in that kind of sense of self overall, which is all very protective for our mental health. This is a lot of the same messages I give to my patients as well, because it's protective, not just burnout, but depression and anxiety and even suicide. So again, very, very important information. And it's not meant to be easy, right? Like it makes sense if these are things that make you feel uncomfortable, because it's a shift in terms of what you've learned and your roles and kind of how we even what's wired in our brain of what we're supposed to do. And if it feels a little bit uncomfortable, I would say you're doing it well, because it's if it were easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So thank you for mentioning all of that.
And Joanne, I'm always wanting our listener to know, what can we do about it? I would love for you to expand on that. What can we do?
And again, this is one of those where we can give you so much information. So I'll stay with some of the things that Erin and I always talk about, which is have more awareness. Like really ask yourself those questions, like Erin was saying, like what's the cost in this season of your life? And what would you want to shift? And something else that we need more of, which we always talk about, is celebrate. Like, really pay attention to all the big and little things that you do and honor them, and have that be a fuel for you to keep on moving forward, which is so protective of your mental health and burnout. And it's free. It doesn't take that long, right? It feels weird. Like I joke, like high five yourself, pat yourself in the back. And my women laugh, but they do it now more naturally because we've learned, right? And then other things that might be a little harder that we also talk so much is think of where you need to set a boundary, whether it's internal or external. Is there something that you need to start saying no for yourself, or someone that you need to get a little bit of distance? And the reminder that the boundaries are not to push away, but to protect what's important. And then trust yourself in this process of knowing that it's okay for us to not kind of follow these paths, because we are meant in here to change. We're right, like we keep on going back to these women who have paved the way, and how it's our responsibility to keep on paving it, to be those role models. And stop asking, is this okay? Like, will people be mad? And really just pay attention to what's important to you. And I'll leave it there, because we can get so detailed, and it's sometimes about getting to the foundation for us individually that's going to really help us show up better. And it's that overflow of after we fill up our cups that will really spill into everyone else around us, so we all benefit. And I would love to hear your kind of your side, Erin, of what would you say with this question of what we can do.
The two biggest areas I'd like to add, one is prioritizing yourself and that self-care, whatever that's needed. Getting the sleep, getting the time alone, getting some space, and asking for help. Because if you don't do that and you're constantly in that self-sacrifice mode, you can't show up your best self, whether it's as a physician, whether it's as a partner or spouse or a parent. And if we can learn to show up our best because we're pouring into our cup and not running on fumes, everything gets better. And then the second is get the right community. If you are in a community of women physicians and all they want to do is complain because life is hard, versus being in a group of women who are celebrating their wins and finding the changes that they can make to make things better, that's where you're going to find the momentum. So really look for how healthy or unhealthy is your community. And if it's not healthy, take on one of our communities that Joanne and I have built, or create a new one and really minimize how much you're being around people that are kind of sucking the life out of you or creating a negative twist to things, because that is not going to get us to that next phase that we need to.
Yes, this is very aspirational. Love all of that.
And with that, if you love this episode, we would love for you to share it with someone who would also like to celebrate Women's History Month with you. And stay tuned, because our next episode is coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.